In this video, I'm going to show you a very simple yet very powerful pattern that you can use in TypeScript to enable you to build pretty much anything that you want in your React applications. This is a pattern that we use extensively in my new Advanced Patterns React course, which this video is trying to help promote. If you're interested to learn more about the course, there's a waitlist that is currently live, and that is going to be the first link in the description. I'm also going to talk a little bit more about the course towards the end of the video. Now, let's get into the TypeScript pattern. So over here, we have a pretty typical example of an application running TanStack router that is fetching some data on a specific route. We have two routes here. We have the index page, and then we also have a post ID page. The index page essentially is using the standard loader function from TanStack router. We are using React query, so we're prefetching the data of the posts. This is going to be our page that is going to display a feed of posts. So multiple posts in a list, right? We're passing it the query key here, and then we're calling getPosts as the query function. Then inside of the body of the component, everything is pretty simple. We're just accessing the data using useSuspense query with the same query key and the same function. This is a pattern that I just made a video on. It's also in the course, and this is the pattern of always trying to prefetch your data and to put it in loaders instead of your React components. If you haven't seen that video, make sure to check it out. It is really insightful. And then we're just passing our data here as the post property on our post list component. In the post ID route over here, we're doing pretty much the same thing. This one is just going to be for one individual post, which will get linked from one of the components inside of this post list component over here. This one does the same thing. We're just converting the parameters here to a number, which is pretty standard. And then we're also fetching the same data here, just that we're fetching it based on a post ID using the getPost function instead of getting all of the posts. Then here we're accessing the data in the same exact way, and we're passing that data to the post details component. Now, what's important to understand here is that these are two different and separate routes that are fetching different types of data. Yes, both of these are fetching posts in the end, right? One of them is fetching one post based on its ID, and the other one is fetching an entire list of posts. But the data that each post is going to have is not necessarily going to be the same. Because if you think about it, right, whenever you're showing a list of posts, you're probably going to have less data than you are going to have on the actual detail page of that specific post, right? For performance reasons and also for the user experience. You don't want to show all of the information of a post on a feed. Instead, you show only what is critical, what is important to show it on a list, and then on the details page of that post, you show the rest of the data. That's usually how it happens, and it also makes more sense. And so that's the important distinction to make, because now we're going to get to our problem. So let's go here inside of our index, and let's go here and open up the post list component, which, remember, receives the data as its post prop. So if you open up this component here, well, everything is pretty simple, right? This component doesn't fetch its own data, just receives the array of posts and then maps over each individual post and just renders the postcard component. Now, some developers might choose to actually fetch this data directly inside of the component as opposed to having it receive props with the data, which is fine. That's not something that I personally like to do because I generally like to think that data is more related to navigation, and so it belongs outside of React components. But if you fetch it inside of the component, it's also fine. Sometimes that is a valid approach. Then if we open up here this postcard component, now we're going to see that we actually have an error. So this postcard component, it receives a post over here as its props, which is typed post as the post type, and then it actually renders out some details about the post, like the post title, the post body, and also the post.comments count. Unfortunately, we have an error here that is saying that property comments count does not exist on type post. And this makes sense because if you come here and we actually look at the definition of our post, this is our type. It has an ID, it has a title, it has a body, and it also has a user ID. Now, usually in most applications, the actual raw type of an entity, in our case, the post, is going to have only the properties that that post has in the database. So all the columns that the post has when it's actually saved in the database. It's not going to have any computed property or any other property that is related, like the comments count, because it doesn't directly go as a column inside of the database. And this is our problem, because now in our post card component, we are expecting comments count, but Typescript is not aware of it, even though our data is actually there. And I can prove this to you. If you go here to our index and actually go and open up the definition of get posts, this is our function over here that is going to get us an array of posts. Again, this is simplified for the tutorial video. Over here, you're going to see that we actually have a hard-coded value of comments count that we return here as part of each post. Now again, in a real application, this would probably come from the database. You would run a separate query, but again, that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is that we actually have the data of comments count that is returned as part of each individual post. And so what we need is we now need to figure out a way, a really smart way to actually get this comments count property here at the type level for us to actually be able to work with it in our application. Because as it currently stands, we are actually going to see the actual value of the comments count. Because again, the data is returned from the API. The only thing that is missing is Typescript. But that is also important because we don't want to have errors in our Typescript, and oftentimes our app is actually not even going to build until we actually clear all of these errors. So we need to find a clean and efficient solution to handle these types. Now, your first thought might be, well, we can simply come here to the postcard type, and we can simply come here and add the type of the comments count. And that is going to get rid of our error here because now we no longer have an error. Perfect, that works, and that solved the problem, at least for this component. The problem with this approach is that now, if we go here to post list, now we actually have our error over here. Because now this post list receives an array of posts, not an array of posts with comments count. And so if we also want to fix that error, we have to come in here and we also have to add the comments count property to the post list component as well. But this is a little bit inefficient, right? Because now we just had to duplicate this type in two different places. We're repeating ourselves. And also, what happens now if we come back here to our actual API over here, and now this endpoint is also going to return the likes count over here. And also let's put them here, right? Likes count. Now let's say that we make a change later on to the API. It now also returns likes count. And of course, we want to display those likes count here inside of this component, right? Let's put it like this. Let's maybe not make this a link just to kind of keep things simple. And let's put it like this, right? Let's say that now we also want to use this likes count. Well, now we have the same exact problem, which means that we have to come here once again, and then we also have to add the likes count here, which is then going to give us the same error in this component as well, which we also have to add likes count. This is very inefficient because we're repeating ourselves, and then we have to manage every single time that we have new properties. We want to also add them to each individual type in multiple places. And also keep in mind, this is a very simple application for this video, but in reality, your postcard component might use plenty of other subcomponents as well that might also need all of this data over here. For example, I don't know, you can have a postcard buttons component that is going to have a button for the comments, a button to like. Both of these properties over here, you're going to want to have in that component, which means that you're going to want to put those inside of, again, yet another place. And you're quickly going to see that this approach is not going to work. It's super messy, it's hard to understand, you're repeating a lot of code, and it doesn't scale. We need to find something different. Now you might think, well, we could just take this type over here and we can extract it and we can put it in a separate place and just reuse that across all of these components. And you would be right, but I would ask you to just hold on that thought for just a second, because I'm going to show you a better version of that we're going to implement to actually solve this problem. But first, before we get to that one, let me show you another solution that I've seen some developers make in their applications. Instead of hard coding each one of these types over here and then repeating that across multiple components, and then also handling the fact that this API over here can actually change over time and change the values that it actually returns, what you could also do is you could actually get the return value of this function over here if you can, because sometimes you can't because the backend is in a separate code base or something, or even a separate language, but you can get the return value of this function over here and actually use that as the type in your components. Because that would solve the problem of repeating this type over here in multiple components. You can just put the same return value of this function over here across all of your types. And it would also solve the fact that this API can return different values over time, because now you don't have to manage them, right? As soon as this API changes, its return type is also going to change automatically, and it's no longer your problem to deal with. Now, for this, you could approach it in two different ways. You could, for example, take this type over here, right? And you can actually extract it and put it here as a type, right? like get post response, for example, and then we can put it here, right? And we can actually export this type and then use it inside of our components. Or we could do something like awaited and then return type of get posts, right? I put this here as an underscore just to kind of have a differentiation. You could do this in either way, right? Either way is totally fine. And then you can export that type and actually use it inside of the components. So for example, let's export just this one to kind of just illustrate my point over here. We can export it and then we can go here to our post list. We can get rid of all of this. We can do this, get post response. That is going to be our get post response. And then in our post card over here, we can just do get post response and then index it by a number that is going to give us one individual post. Now we've solved our problem because now, again, every single time that this API changes, whatever values we actually get from it, it doesn't really matter. Our types are always going to be up to date. And this might seem like a great solution, but there's actually one very significant drawback to applying your types this way. And that is that now your post list component and your post card component and any other component that potentially uses this type over here is now tightly coupled to that API endpoint and specifically the values that it returns. Which means that if you want to come here inside of any other route, any other place where you want to show a feed of posts, a list of posts, and you want to use this post list component, you have to make sure and you have to guarantee that you are going to return at least the same data on that query that you are returning on this get post function, which may not always be the case, right? Because not every single page in your application that shows a list of posts is going to return the same data. Maybe you want to return some data in one page and some other slightly different data in another page. And if now your types are actually locked to the return value of one specific endpoint, it's going to be harder to actually reuse these components across the different places, which generally you should. If you're trying to render posts, generally you want to reuse as many components as you can. Granted, you can't always reuse everything 100% because again, the page is going to be different, but generally you want to try to reuse as much as possible, and doing it this way is actually going to impede your ability to do so, right? So this is also not a good approach, and I would not recommend that you implement it this way. So what is the approach? What is the clean, efficient, reusable solution that is going to allow you to plug any type in any place with any data and then have actual components that are reusable at scale? Well, let me show you. So let's go back here to our API and let's just undo everything that we've done because we want our API to pretty much remain the same. We're no longer going to tightly couple our API with our components. Our backend is going to be separate. We're going to treat it as separate, and we're also going to treat it as if we did not have any access to it or its types whatsoever. Imagine that now this backend is written in Python or in Go or something. It's an entirely different code base and we cannot access its types in any way. It doesn't matter because our solution does not need the types of the backend directly. What we can do is we can come here to our types inside of our client, so inside of our front end, where we actually defined the type of our post. Now again, in this simple tutorial video, our type for our post actually comes from the front end, but usually if you don't have access to a backend, you're still going to have to define your base type that is going in the database somewhere, and that is this type over here. You want to come wherever you have this type, and then you're going to create a series of combinable and customizable types that you could export individually or export as a bundle together to form one singular type that you can use in your application. So for example, we can come in here and we can do type post with comments count, and we can export that, right? We can have a type here, post with comments count. It is going to be the post and the comments count property here, which is going to have a number. We can then do the same exact thing with post with likes count. It is going to have a post, and then it is going to have a likes count property as well. Now in this case, we can export them here. So we can come here to our post list component, and we can do here, we can replace the type. We can put post with comments count. We can import this, and then we can do and post with likes count and put that as an array, which we can also import. We can then get rid of this import here because it's no longer used. And now this component is going to receive an array of a type that is going to be post with comments count and post with likes count. You can either choose this approach, which is to export each individual type and then combine them manually, or I'm going to show you how you could actually combine them at the type level inside of this file and just export that instead. But for now, let's just do it like this. Then in postcard, we can do the exact same thing. We can have this receive here a post with comments count and post with likes count, and then we no longer have any errors. Now it doesn't actually matter what our endpoint actually here changes or returns. It doesn't matter as long as this over here, this index, as long as we're passing this data over here that is both going to have the comments count and the likes count, we don't care about anything else. We don't care about any other potential properties that might be there. The only thing that we care about is that we have a post, we have its comments count and likes count, and that's it. And that's generally what you want to do, because now this post list component is completely isolated. It doesn't care. It's not responsible for where the data is coming from or how the data is being provided to it. The only thing that it cares about is that it receives this data here with these properties over here, and that's it. And that's how your components should be. They should be simple, they should be reusable, and they should not care about where or how they are being used. As long as you use them with the actual props that they expect, they are going to work. And that's the same for this postcard component here. It doesn't care where it's being used. We can use it as part of this list component here, or we could plug it individually someplace else. As long as we give it a post with these properties, it is going to work. Now, let me show you a little trick that you can do that I generally like to prefer, because in most cases, it actually makes a little bit more sense. Instead of combining both of these types over here, what I like to do is I like to come in here and I like to export a type that I'm going to call post for list. And that is going to be any post that we want to show in a list, right? And then we're going to combine this over here in this types file and then use that type instead. It is going to save us a little bit because we won't have to actually combine this in every single component. Now, granted, this assumes that you actually want all of your list posts. So every single time that a post is going to show up in a list, that you want this to actually always have a comments count and a likes count. For most cases, usually that's what you want to do, but doing it this way actually allows you the opportunity to not do it. If you need a specific other case where you have some different properties, you can just come in here and you can actually create and export a different type and use that there as well. Or you can take these individual types, pick and choose what you need, and just use those instead. That is why this pattern is actually very usable and very extensible, because you can pick and choose every single type that you want on demand. So now with this, we can go back here to our post list and we can actually remove all of this and then do post for list. I find this is a little bit cleaner, right? You have post list and it receives an array of post for list. I find this just makes sense. It's really easy to understand. We can come in here. We can do the exact same thing, right? Our post is going to be a post for list, right? This makes sense. Right now, the postcard is going to be used inside of a list. Again, if you don't want this, you just create a different type and you plug it in here. It's fine. But again, for most cases, postcards usually are going to be used in some sort of a list. And now this works, right? This is super efficient, which also means that we can come back here to our post ID route, which we haven't seen since the beginning of the video. But now you're going to see that in the post details over here, we actually have the same issue. The post details here needs a post.user, which is going to have a name property, and then a post.comments, which is not going to be a number of comments count, but actually an array of individual comments. And this goes back to what I said in the beginning of this video. You're going to have different pages and they're going to need different data, even though they're both returning a post. On the details page, you want to show more things like the user, the comments, ultimately whatever your user experience actually wants for the application. And on the list, you're going to show a subset of that usually, and that is going to be less data and not necessarily the same data. And to solve this, we can actually implement the same exact pattern, which is why this pattern is really powerful, because you can essentially use it for anything. We can come in here and we can actually create a new type that is going to be export post with user, which is going to be a post and a user. We're going to import the user from our /user/types, which we also would need to create in our application. And then we can also create another one. We can do export post with comments, and we can import and actually use the comments over here. Now this should be a post, right? Because we only want to put the post over here. And this comment, we actually want to import it over here from /comment/types, because there is a default type in Typescript comment, and that's usually going to cause problems with your types, right? Now we have post user, post with comments, and actually I'm going to remove all of these exports over here because currently we're not using them inside of our application at this point. Again, if you are using them, then just export them at will. I generally only like to export things on demand as they're needed and not just start exporting everything, because then it makes it a little bit difficult to know when something isn't being used. And here here we can create a different type. We can do export type post for details, and that is going to be post with user, post with comments, which we can come here inside of our post details component, and we can replace this post over here. And now our errors are completely gone, and our types are super extensible and super reusable, as are our components. Now, if you go here to our post ID root, we have no error because this data is compatible with what the post details component expects. So that's perfectly fine. Our index root as well has no error because the data is compatible over here. And now we've solved our problem in a really, really clean and efficient way, following good code patterns and best practices. And honestly, this is really great. With this, you can build anything that you want. Again, as I said, this is super extensible, and there's no limit to virtually what you can do. This is a very, very efficient pattern, and it's a pattern that we actually use very extensively in Advanced Patterns React. In Advanced Patterns React, which is my new course that's all about advanced design patterns in React, we use this extensively because we need this. We need to build a complex application with a lot of components, way more than I've showed in this video, and we need the TypeScript support to enable us to do that in a way that is super efficient, super simple, and allows us to scale to many, many features as we do in the course. So this video over here was just a sneak peek of this pattern and how you would potentially use it in a simplified application, but the course really takes it to the next level and shows you a complete and big project with this pattern and with many other more patterns, and that is going to make you able to build really complex applications that scale with relative ease. We spent a lot of time in the course focusing on these patterns, learning these patterns, understanding them, understanding why they're good as opposed to using something else. And then once we do that, we have a very big arsenal of tools in our tool belt that we can use to just build feature after feature after feature super easily. That's how senior developers code their applications, and that's what Advanced Patterns React is really all about. So if you want to see more patterns like this, if you want to really take your React development skills to the next level and finally get over that intermediate plateau, which really you can't do by just watching YouTube videos or like building applications on your own, you really need to follow somebody that knows what they're doing, and this course is the resource that is going to provide you with exactly what you need. The course is coming out on April 17th, and there's a waitlist for it right now that you can join, which I would highly recommend. I'm going to be sharing a couple of cool things about the course on that waitlist that I'm not going to share with anyone else. Once again, this is my most advanced React course that I've ever made, and it's the only course that is going to get you past that intermediate level and to that next level of React development and have you code like the senior developers actually do in the real world at top companies. So once again, the waitlist is going to be the first link in the description. I highly recommend it, and I will see you on the other side. So that's it. That's what I have for this video. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure to leave it a big thumbs up. You can click here to subscribe, or you can click here to watch a different video of mine that YouTube seems to think that you're really going to enjoy. With that being said, my name has been Kozan. This is Kozan Solutions. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Ciao, ciao.